The sky was bleeding. A slow, copper-red seep across the Arizona frontier, the kind that made the horizon look like a wound that would never close. Corporal John Markham rode through it like a ghost, still searching for a war that wouldn't let him go. His horse, a pale buckskin, moved stiff through the smoke drifting over the canyon rim, the smell of gunpowder and scorched mesquite thick enough to taste. Below, where the land broke into gulches and dry riverbeds, the wreckage of a cavalry patrol sprawled across the dust. Blue coats, bayonets half buried in sand, buzzards already circling, carving lazy black halos over the dying light. John dismounted, boots sinking into the loose shale. The silence felt heavy, righteous, the kind that used to follow sermons before the world forgot what mercy sounded like. He moved through the ruins slow, careful. He didn't want to know their names. He'd stopped wanting to know anyone's name a long time ago. The ambush had been Apache or Navajo. The old generals would have said it didn't matter. But John knew better. The bullet holes were too clean, the arrows too close. This wasn't war anymore. It was despair dressed as justice. At the far edge of the camp, where the fire had gone out, he found her. A girl, barely more than 16, her wrists bound, her face half hidden under tangled black hair. She was breathing shallowly, one side of her dress dark with dried blood. Her ankles were cut raw where rope had rubbed them to the bone. He went still. The last time he'd seen someone bound like that, it had been one of his own doing. The war had taught him plenty about cruelty, enough to last him a few lifetimes. He knelt, touched her shoulder gently. Her eyes opened, not the soft brown he expected, but sharp amber, feral, frightened, alive. "Easy," he said, voice rough from dust. "You're safe now." She flinched, tried to pull away, muttering something in Navajo, quick and desperate. John didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear. He cut the ropes from her wrists, watching the welts bloom red against her skin. She tried to rise, stumbled, caught herself on her palms. Her voice came again, weaker this time, one English word buried inside the rest. "Why?" He looked past her, at the burned-out wagons, the corpses, the broken flagpoles still fluttering faintly in the heat. "I reckon someone ought to," he said. They rode together before the sun dropped behind the ridge. She sat stiff behind him on the saddle, hands clutching his coat, body trembling each time the horse stumbled. John could feel the faint weight of her breath against his back, uneven, wary. When they stopped at a creek for water, she wouldn't drink. He filled the canteen and left it beside her. He built a small fire, just enough to keep the coyotes away. She sat across from it, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes never leaving him. "Got a name?" he asked softly. No answer. He waited, the way a man waits for weather change. Finally, she spoke, voice raw, like someone unaccustomed to speaking in any tongue that wasn't prayer. "Atsa, John Markham," he said, nodding once. She repeated it, her accent rounding the edges. "Markham." He managed a faint smile. "That'll do." Later, when the fire was dying and the stars began to crawl out of the dark, he took off his coat and laid it over her shoulders. She didn't thank him, just looked at him, long, steady, searching, as if trying to decide whether he was ghost or man. He turned away, staring at the sky. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled over the desert. By morning, the horizon had turned to gold. They followed the river east, slow and silent. The only sound was the creak of leather, the whisper of wind through sage. John found himself watching her more than he meant to, the way she moved, light and quiet, every step deliberate. There was strength in her stillness. He thought of the men who'd tied her. The fire in her eyes told him she'd outlive every one of them if given the chance. At noon, they stopped beneath a dead cottonwood. He unwrapped a strip of jerky, offered her half. She stared at it, then at him. "Soldier food." He nodded. "It'll keep you standing." She hesitated, then took it, biting cautiously, as though each chew was a test of trust. After a moment, she said, "You not kill me?" The question hit him harder than a bullet. "No," he said quietly. "Not today. Then tomorrow." He looked away. That's God's business. She considered that, eyes narrowing slightly. You not look like God's man. He laughed softly. Ain't that the truth? They made camp again that night, near an old mission ruin. Adobe walls half collapsed. The cross atop the steeple leaning like it, too, had lost faith. John set a fire in the corner where the wind couldn't reach. Atsa wandered the edges, tracing her fingers along the faded murals. Saints with missing faces, painted suns worn pale. "Your people make this?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, my kind just forgot it." She turned, her gaze sharp. "You fight in war?" "Which one?" he muttered. Her silence said she already knew. He stirred the embers. "Yeah, I fought. Killed too many men I never hated. Watched boys die calling for mothers that'd never hear him." After a pause, he added, "That's why I stopped." She crouched beside him, eyes glinting. "No man stop war. War stop man." He met her gaze. There was no softness there, only truth. For a long moment, they sat in the quiet, firelight trembling between them like something alive. Then, from the darkness, a coyote howled, long, mournful, ancient. Atsa tilted her head. "He cry for the dead." John looked into the flames. "Then he's got company." Near midnight, he woke to the sound of her breathing, steady now, softer. She slept curled beneath his coat, face turned toward the firelight. Something in his chest shifted, not pain but memory. The echo of the daughter he'd never held, the wife buried before the ink on his discharge papers had dried. He rose quietly, stepped outside. The desert stretched silver under moonlight. He took off his hat, let the wind touch his face. Somewhere out there, the past still waited. Men who'd branded him deserter, ghosts who whispered his name through every sandstorm. He looked back at the girl. Maybe, he thought, this was what mercy looked like. Not clean, not easy, but human. He sat by the fire until dawn, watching the light crawl over her skin, the way it softened the scars on her wrists. When she stirred awake, he spoke without looking up. "Head east with me. There's a settlement a day's ride out. Dr. Therrell'll set you right." She studied him for a long time. "And you?" He shrugged. "I'll see where the road runs." She frowned. "You run from ghosts." He smiled faintly. "Ain't everyone?" The morning broke clean and cruel. They saddled up in silence, the church cross watching from above like a crooked god. As they rode into the sun, the desert came alive, wind lifting dust in soft, golden spirals, the sound of hooves a slow hymn to nowhere. John glanced over his shoulder once, toward the ruin shrinking behind them. The fire had gone out, but the smoke still rose, thin, stubborn, beautiful, like faith refusing to die. Morning came pale and brittle, the color of a tarnished coin. They had been riding since dawn, shadows of hawks sweeping across the dust. The river that had once fed this country had dried to a ribbon of cracked clay, and every hoofbeat sent up a cough of white ash. Atsa rode beside him now instead of behind. The first day she'd barely spoken. Now her silence felt deliberate, like she was measuring the space between them. Each glance she gave him was a test he wasn't sure he was passing. John Markham had learned to live without words, but her quiet carried weight, a language of its own. When she shaded her eyes to the horizon, he knew she was searching for danger. When her fingers brushed the knife at her belt, he knew she still didn't trust the world enough to sleep easy. And when she looked at him, really looked, he felt the war stir in his chest again. They found shelter that night beneath a sandstone bluff. The wind had teeth. It hissed through the cracks, carrying the dry scent of creosote and ghosts. He unsaddled the buckskin, poured a little water into the horse's mouth, and watched it vanish down the throat like mercy swallowed whole. Atsa gathered brush for a fire. When the flame caught, it painted her face with a color he hadn't seen since before the war. Alive, fierce, almost holy. "You always look east," she said. Her voice startled him. It had grown rougher, stronger. "East is where the river used to run," he answered. "And now it's where the road ends." She studied him over the fire. "You talk like a man waiting to die." "Maybe I am. Then why save me?" He stared into the flames until his eyes burned. Didn't seem right to leave another soul to the buzzards. She tossed another stick into the fire. Buzzards still come, soldier. They just change shape. The days bled together. The desert peeled their layers away. Fear first, then anger, then the soft ache that came after hunger. By the third morning, John could see the fever returning in her. She hid it well, tightening her jaw, walking when she should have rested, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. He stopped their horse near a cluster of ocotillo and set his pack down. "You're burning up," he said. She shook her head. "Keep moving." He caught her arm, gently but firm. "Sit. That's an order." The word order made her eyes flash. She wrenched free, swayed, and nearly fell. He caught her again, easing her down. "Easy. You're safe." "No one's safe," she whispered, voice breaking. "Not here. Not with you." He winced, but he didn't let go. "I won't hurt you." She closed her eyes. "I have heard that before." He said nothing after that. Just soaked his bandana in the canteen and pressed it to her forehead, his fingers trembling. For hours he sat beside her, watching the fever shimmer across her face, the way her breath rasped in and out. He prayed, not the soldier's prayer for victory, but the smaller, quieter kind that asked only to be heard. When dusk came, she woke. Her first words were not apology, but memory. "You fight at Canyon de Chelly?" The question froze him. He had, years ago, the cavalry raid that burned whole villages to ash. He remembered the smoke rising like a storm, the screams of women and children echoing through stone. Orders had been clear then: drive them out, scorch the valley. He hadn't asked who lived there. "Yes," he said finally. "My people die there." He met her gaze, guilt searing through him like a second sun. "Then maybe I owe you more than a canteen and a blanket." She didn't answer. The silence between them thickened until it became a third presence, heavier than the desert itself. They reached the foothills 2 days later. The land changed there, mesas rising like the backs of sleeping giants, the air cooler, the wind carrying the faint smell of rain. Atsa seemed awake with it. She began to hum under her breath, low, rhythmic, a melody older than words. John listened as they rode, the sound winding through his chest like smoke. "What's that song?" he asked. "It called the wind to listen," she said, "so the dead can rest." "Does it work?" "Sometimes." He thought of the men he'd killed, the friends he'd buried in mud. "Maybe you can teach it to me." She smiled just barely. "You have too much noise inside." "Yeah," he said. "That's the problem." At sundown, they found an abandoned trading post, walls sagging, roof half collapsed. Inside, dust lay thick on the floorboards, and a single mirror hung crooked above the bar. John brushed it clean with his sleeve. His reflection stared back at him, gaunt, eyes hollow, beard streaked gray. Atsa watched him from the doorway. "You look for the man you were." He let the question hang. "Can't find him." "Then stop trying." He turned to her. "You make it sound easy. And not easy, but desert forget faster than man." He couldn't help but laugh softly. "Then maybe that's why I came here." She stepped closer, slow and deliberate. The distance between them felt charged, the air trembling like a drawn bowstring. "You carry ghosts, Markham," she said. "They heavy, but not real." He searched her face, the faint scar at her temple, the steadiness in her gaze. "And yours." "Mine's still hungry." The words lingered in the dim air, a confession and a warning. That night, the storm came. Lightning tore across the sky, thunder rolling like cannon fire. Rain swept through the broken roof, turning the dust to mud. They huddled near the hearth, their fire sputtering. Water dripped through the rafters, trailing down Atsa's hair, glinting in the glow. John handed her his coat again. She pushed it back. "You cold too." "Soldiers used to it." "I'm not child," she said, wrapping her own shawl tighter. He smiled faintly. "Didn't say you were." The thunder cracked again, loud, close. She flinched before she could stop herself. He reached out, his hand brushing hers by accident, then not by accident. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Her fingers were warm, trembling, alive. She looked at him, truly looked, and he saw it then, not fear, but recognition. Two souls burned down to ember, finding in each other the last trace of light. She pulled away first. "You think kindness wash blood?" "No," he said, "but maybe it helps you sleep." She stared into the fire. Sleep is where ghosts wait. Outside, the rain slowed. Inside, something else began. Not love yet, but the fragile mercy that comes before it. By morning, the world smelled clean. The storm had stripped the dust from the air, left the sky a bruised violet. They walked out to the porch. The desert stretched before them, glittering with pools of new water. For the first time, the horizon didn't look like an ending. John turned to her. "There's a town east, Dry River. Doctor there. Maybe work for me, food for you." She shook her head. "Towns see me, they see ghost. Indian girl with white man. They shoot first, ask after." He sighed. "Then we keep moving." "Where?" He looked toward the mountains. "Anywhere they don't know my name." She considered that. "Then we same." They set out again, the sun climbing high, the land steaming from last night's rain. Hours later, as they rode a narrow pass, John noticed smoke curling from the canyon below. Not the kind the wind makes, but campfire smoke. He reined in, scanning the ridgeline. Atsa followed his gaze. "You see them too?" He nodded slowly. "Men. Maybe soldiers. Maybe worse." Her hand went to her knife. "They follow us." "Could be." He looked back toward the open desert they'd crossed. Nothing moved but wind. Still, unease crawled down his spine. War had taught him one thing. Peace never lasted longer than the echo of the last shot. He met her eyes. "We'll camp light tonight. No fire." She understood without argument. As they led the horse up the ridge, the first cold wind of evening cut across them. The air smelled of iron and distance. Somewhere behind them, a hawk cried, sharp and lonely. John glanced over his shoulder. In the dying light, he thought he saw figures on horseback, small against the far horizon. Then the sun swallowed them whole. He tightened the reins. "Keep close." "I always do," she murmured. They rode into the dark, the stars lighting their path like lanterns hung by the dead. Between them lay silence, not fear now, but something deeper, harder to name. It was the kind of silence that comes before a reckoning. And somewhere out there in the endless desert, the past began to stir again, like ash rising from old fire. The wind turned cruel in the night. It came down from the mountains like a pack of wolves, howling through the canyons, carrying with it the scent of gunpowder and sweat. John woke before dawn, that soldier's instinct that never quite died. The stars above were thin, fading fast in the bruised sky. Atsa was still asleep, wrapped in her blanket near the embers of a cold fire. For a moment he watched her, the rise and fall of her chest, the loose strand of black hair across her cheek. It was the only peace he had known in years. Then he heard it, the faint rhythm of hooves. Not wind, not imagination. Men. He rose quietly, hand brushing the worn grip of his rifle. In the distance, a glint of steel caught the newborn light. "Get up," he whispered. Atsa stirred. "What is it?" "They found us." They broke camp in silence. Every movement was measured, saddle tightened, pack secured, horse steadied. The dawn spread slow and gray across the desert floor, revealing the tracks they had left behind. Too easy to follow, too late to hide. "Who are they?" Atsa asked, eyes scanning the ridge. "Could be bounty men," John said. "Could be worse. Men who hunt for money or revenge." He loaded a single bullet, chamber clicking shut. Sometimes both were the same face. They mounted and urged the horse into a trot, keeping low along the canyon wall. The land was open, offering nowhere to vanish, only distance, and the hope it might be enough. By mid-morning, the sun had risen fierce and white. Sweat slicked John's neck, dust gritted between his teeth. While he risked a glance back, he saw them. 3 riders, dark against the pale horizon. No banners, no mercy, just motion and intent. "How far?" Atsa asked. "Half a mile, maybe less." "You fight." "If we have to." She studied his face, and something in her eyes hardened. Not fear, but resolve. "Then we fight together." They reached a narrow gorge, steep walls of red rock, a dry riverbed running through its gut. It wasn't much of a fortress, but it offered shade and choke points. John pulled the horse into a stand of mesquite. "We'll make our stand here." Atsa slid from the saddle, already scanning for higher ground. "You shoot," she said. "I move." He frowned. "You ever been in a gunfight?" She gave a ghost of smile. "You ever run from cavalry with nothing but wind to hide you?" That shut him up. Together, they worked fast, stacking stones for cover, scattering sand to hide tracks, checking ammunition. He had 13 rounds left. She had a knife and a bow she'd carved from a wagon wheel spoke, strung with her own hair. When the riders appeared, the sun was at their backs, turning them into silhouettes. Men of shadow, horses snorting fire. The first bullet cracked against a rock near John's ear. He ducked, aimed, fired once. A rider jerked backward, slumping from a saddle. The other two split wide, circling like wolves around wounded prey. Atsa moved like a whisper, one moment beside him, the next gone, vanishing into the rocks. He wanted to call out, but then he saw her above, crouched on a ledge, bow drawn. The arrow flew true, struck one man's shoulder, and spun him from his horse. The last rider dismounted, shouting something guttural. A gun barked twice. Stone splinters sliced John's cheek. He rolled, returned fire, missed. The man advanced. A broad figure, scar across his jaw, badge half-polished on his chest. Not bounty, not outlaw, soldier. Recognition hit like thunder. Sergeant Clay Danner, Union Cavalry. Same regiment, same massacre. John's pulse roared in his ears. He hadn't seen that face since Shea, the day the valley burned. "Markham," the man shouted. "Thought you were dead." "Almost was," John called back. "You got a lot of explaining to do, Captain." "Not to you." The man laughed, low and mean. "You deserted, took the pay and ran. Now you ride with the very savages we were sent to clean out. What's that make you?" John rose from cover, eyes steady. "Tired." The sergeant leveled his rifle. "You're a ghost walking, boy." "Maybe," John said, "but ghosts shoot straight." He fired. The bullet struck Danner in the chest. The man staggered back, disbelief frozen on his face, then fell without sound. For a long time, there was only the wind. Then Atsa climbed down, breath ragged, eyes fierce. She stopped beside the fallen man, nudging his boot with her foot. "He your brother?" "Used to be," John said softly. She looked at him, at the pain he didn't speak. "You fight ghosts again?" He nodded. "Seems they keep finding me." By noon, the bodies were gone, buried under shallow cairns of stone. John didn't pray. He'd said enough to the dead already. Atsa watched him in silence. "You know them," she said. "Yes. They hunt you. They hunt what I used to be." She studied the horizon. "Then desert never let you rest." "No," he said, voice hoarse. "But maybe it'll let me atone." They rode on, the wind drying the blood on his sleeve, the sun climbing high again. The world felt emptier than before, and yet he noticed her riding closer now. Not beside him, but near enough that he could feel her shadow across his hand. That night, they camped in the shelter of a cliff. The firelight licked at the rock face, painting it with their ghosts. John sat apart, cleaning his rifle in the quiet, while Atsa traced shapes in the dust, circles, spirals, the map of her own past. "You kill your own," she said finally. "I killed what needed killing. Does it feel different?" He looked up. "No." She tossed a twig into the fire. "When I was small, my father say, when blood meets blood, the earth remembers. Then this ground will remember plenty. Maybe too much." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the pop of burning wood. Then she asked softly, "What you do after war? Try to forget it." "Did you?" He shook his head. "It doesn't let go." Atsa rose, stepped closer to him. "Then you carry it wrong." "Wrong. You carry it like wound," she said, touching her chest. "Carry it like lesson." He wanted to tell her she didn't understand, that no one could. But when he met her eyes, calm, ancient, alive, he realized she did. The distance between them dissolved. For a heartbeat, they were two souls carved from the same scar. He reached up, brushing the dirt from her hand. "You ever think there's still a road back?" She tilted her head. "To where?" To peace. She smiled faintly. Peace not a place, soldier. It a moment. You catch it or lose it. And in that moment, in the flicker of firelight, in the trembling air between them, he almost caught it. Almost. They slept light, wrapped in blankets beneath a cracked sky. Before dawn, a faint glow rose on the horizon. Not sunlight, but fire. A column of smoke twisted into the gray. John sat up fast. That's not ours. Atsa followed his gaze. Her face was carved from stone. Other riders. How many? Too many. He packed a rifle, voice steady but cold. Then we ride hard. They fled east again, the horse laboring under the weight of haste. Behind them, the glow grew brighter, a burning mark against the world. The men Dana rode with were not done. Vengeance didn't die with one bullet. It spread like fire in dry grass. By mid-morning, gunfire cracked in the distance. Atsa twisted in the saddle. They close. John's jaw clenched. We'll reach the ridge. After that, we make our stand. The ridge was a knife edge of stone, the desert sprawling below like a vast, wounded sea. The wind screamed through the pass. He helped her down, both of them panting. You said you tired of fighting, she said. I am. Then why stay? He looked out across the horizon. Because running doesn't make a man clean. She stared at him, eyes fierce and bright. Then I stay too. No, yes. He almost argued, then stopped. There was no command strong enough to move her now. The sound of hooves rose again. Dust swirled below like a storm being born. He turned to her, voice rough. Whatever happens, you keep moving east. Don't look back. She shook her head. If I go, you die. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's the point. But she only reached up, touched his cheek, a gesture as light as breath. No, you live, or the desert win. The first rider crested the ridge then, rifle raised, face lost in glare. John took aim, heart hammering. Then let's see who the desert remembers. He fired. The first shot split the dawn clean in half. A spark tore through the ridge and echoed down the gorge, the kind of sound that silences the living and wakes the dead. Dust leapt from the rocks. Horses screamed somewhere below. John fired again, lever snapping back with the rhythm of a man who'd been born to end things. Atsa was already moving, a shadow darting through smoke, her bow bending, her hair lashing across her face. Arrows whispered where bullets roared. The men below, 6 now, not 3, spread out along the canyon lip. Sunlight caught their spurs, their brass, the cold lines of their intent. Bounty hunters maybe soldiers gone rogue. It didn't matter. They carried the same gospel, blood for blood. John dropped one before the echo of the first shot had died. The man folded backward, tumbling into dust. Another crouched behind a boulder, firing wild. The lead spat close enough to sting his arm, leaving a hot line across his skin. Atsa called his name once, her voice swallowed by thunder. He looked. She was cornered near the base of the ridge, 2 riders closing in from opposite sides. One carried a whip, the other a rifle slung loose. John didn't think. He moved. He slid down the slope in a cascade of shale, firing twice on the descent. The first bullet shattered the rifleman's knee. The second caught the whip man in the throat. Both went down choking. He landed hard beside her, breath ragged. You all right? She nodded, eyes wide. You bleed. He glanced at his arm. Not enough to stop me. They turned as another shadow rose on the ridge. A tall figure, face veiled in dust, carrying a long-barreled pistol that gleamed like silver judgment. The man's voice carried easily. Markham! John froze. He knew that voice. Captain Markham, the man called again, descending the slope with steady steps. Never thought I'd find you hiding behind a squaw. The name landed like a knife. Captain. He hadn't heard it in years. The man came into view. Long coat, preacher's collar turned gray with dirt. Reverend Josiah Vane. Once chaplain to the regiment. Now a killer dressed in grace. Lay down your rifle. Vane said, calm as Sunday morning. You can still end this clean. John's hands tightened. Ain't nothing clean left, Reverend. Vane smiled thinly. You still blame me for Shay, don't you? For what had to be done? You burned a village full of women and children. Collateral, Vane said. You think God weeps for heathens? John lifted the rifle, voice low. I think he weeps for men like you. Vane's pistol rose in answer. Then we'll see whose sermon lasts longer. The world cracked open. They traded fire across the ridge, sparks against the rising sun, gunpowder and prayer colliding. Atsa circled low, loosing arrows into the men who still crawled among the rocks. The air stank of iron and death. Each breath was a promise broken. John's shoulder burned. He dropped behind cover, loading with shaking hands. His mind ran red. Flashes of the mission he'd led years ago. The faces of the dead, the fire consuming everything righteous. He had followed orders then, just as Vane had preached them. Cleanse the valley. Cleanse the soul. Now the preacher's words came back like ghosts. He rose again, firing. The bullet struck Vane's arm, spinning him sideways. The man didn't cry out, just smiled through the pain, eyes bright with madness. You think you've escaped judgment, Markham? John stepped closer. Ain't trying to. Then you admit your sin. I live it. Atsa saw the danger before he did. One of the wounded hunters had crawled close behind John, revolver trembling in his bloody hand. She shouted, "Behind you!" and ran, knife drawn. The shot came at the same time. She reached him. John turned, saw her jerk backward, knife falling from her fingers. The bullet meant for him had found her instead. She dropped into his arms, breath breaking like glass. No, no, no. His words tangled with the wind. Blood seeped between his fingers, hot and dark. Her eyes fluttered open, still bright even as the light dimmed around them. You live, she whispered. Don't you do that, he said, pressing harder. Don't you finish that sentence. She smiled weakly. Desert, remember us. Her hand brushed his cheek, then fell. The world went silent. John turned, slow and empty. The man who'd shot her was dragging himself backward, trying to reload with trembling hands. John raised his rifle. One shot, then another, until there was nothing left to reload. Vane was still standing on the ridge, pistol steady. You see now, he called. Sin begets sin. Her kind dragged you down. God's will is done. John rose, eyes hollow. Then tell your God, I'm coming to collect. He advanced through the smoke, each step deliberate. Vane fired once. The bullet grazed his ribs. John didn't slow. Another shot missed. Then John was upon him, tackling him to the ground. They rolled, fists in fury, until John wrested the pistol free. Vane's face was inches from his, spitting blood and scripture. You think you can kill the word, Markham? You think, the gun roared once. The preacher's words stopped mid-syllable. His head dropped back against the stone. The wind took his last breath and scattered it across the canyon. John stared at him for a long time. Then he looked down at his own hands, shaking, bloody, human. He dropped the gun. When it was over, the ridge was quiet again. Smoke drifted from spent cartridges. The sun rose clean and merciless above the bodies. John knelt beside Atsa. Her blood had dried to rust across her dress, her face peaceful in the way the desert makes the dead beautiful. He laid her bow across her chest, whispered something he couldn't quite finish. Then he began to dig. The earth was hard, unyielding. Each shovelful felt like penance. When the grave was done, he placed her gently inside and covered her with the same dust that had hidden their tracks. He sat there until the light turned red again, the horizon bleeding just as it had the day they met. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he took the preacher's Bible from the dirt, pages torn, words burned, and set it beside the grave. Maybe he'll find you before he finds me, he murmured. The wind stirred, soft like a sigh. The fire that had devoured the morning now smoldered low, casting everything in a mournful glow. John rose, hat in hand. He looked east, where the land stretched endless and unforgiving. His horse waited in silence, reins dragging, as if it too had lost faith in destinations. He whispered, "We ain't done yet." Then he climbed into the saddle and rode toward the horizon, toward nothing, toward everything, toward the last mercy a man might earn when the devil himself grows tired of claiming him. The desert was quiet again, too quiet, the kind that comes after judgment has been passed, when even the wind forgets how to speak. John rode alone through the ash-colored morning, the sun crawling weakly above the world as if ashamed to rise. The ridge where Atsa lay was far behind him now, but her presence hung in the air, in the faint scent of smoke, in the rhythm of his horse's breath, in a whisper that sometimes rose from the wind and almost sounded like her voice. He didn't know where he was going anymore. Maybe nowhere. Maybe that was the point. The horizon had no mercy to offer, only distance, endless and unfeeling. But there was something inside him now that hadn't been there before. Not peace exactly, but the ghost of it, a fragile, flickering ember refusing to die. He reached the edge of the old trail by noon. The land dipped into a shallow valley where a half-collapsed mission stood among the bones of saguaros. The roof was gone, the altar blackened, but the bell still hung there, silent, waiting. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching over shards of sun-bleached tile. His reflection caught in a broken piece of stained glass, a face carved by guilt, eyes hollowed by years of dust and grief. He laughed softly, the sound startling wrong. "I reckon even hell's too full for the likes of me," he said to no one. The church smelled of dust and sage. He moved toward the altar, tracing his fingers across its cracked stone. The marks of old fire were still there, black veins spreading like memories refusing to fade. He knelt. For the first time in years, he bowed his head. But no words came. He wanted to pray, to say something, anything, but the language of faith had long burned out of him. All he could do was sit there, letting the silence speak for him. When he opened his eyes, the light had changed. Afternoon stretched long and gold across the floor. Dust drifted through it like falling spirits. He thought of Atsa, the way she had looked at him without fear, the way her laughter had sounded when the world forgot to be cruel for a moment. He thought of her last words, "Desert, remember us." He stood and stepped outside. The desert had always been cruel, but now it felt alive, as if the wind carried her memory in every grain of sand. He took the old Bible from his coat, the one that had belonged to Vane, and tore it open. The pages fluttered like trapped birds. Some were blank where fire had eaten the words. Others still bled scripture across the edges. He read aloud, voice low and broken. "For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return." He let the book fall into the sand. The wind lifted the pages, scattering them toward the west. Little white ghosts set free. That night, he made camp by a dry riverbed. The moon hung low, pale as a scar. He didn't light a fire. He didn't need to see the flames anymore. The desert itself glowed faintly, silver and solemn. He sat with his back against the saddle, listening to the hush between gusts. Sometimes he imagined footsteps. Sometimes he thought he heard her voice, soft, distant, calling him by the name she had made her own. Markham. Maybe the desert did remember. Maybe ghosts don't haunt out of anger, but to make sure the living don't forget. By dawn, he was riding again. The trail led east into the Badlands, a country of salt and bones, where nothing grew and everything that lived did so out of sheer defiance. It was the kind of place where a man's sins caught up to him. He found what he was looking for near midday, a half-buried wagon, long abandoned, its wheels sunk deep into the earth. Nearby, a bleached cross stood crooked in the sand. Someone had written on it, the words barely legible, "Forgive us." He stared at it a long time, jaw tight. Then he laughed again, but softer now, a sound not a mockery, but surrender. He took off his hat and stood beside the cross. "Forgive you," he murmured. "Hell, I can't even forgive myself." The wind rose then, gentle, not cruel. It carried a whisper through the canyon, brushing against his cheek like a hand he remembered. He closed his eyes. Maybe that was her answer. The days blurred after that. The land shifted colors, gold to red, red to gray. His horse limped more often. His hands shook when he tried to load his rifle. But the ache that had once filled his chest had turned to something else. Not peace, but purpose. He began to ride toward the settlements again. The same places he'd once avoided. Places where people still gathered, where children laughed without knowing the price of it. He didn't wear a badge. He didn't carry a cause. He just helped where he could. A man fixing fences, carrying water, guarding travelers against bandits and ghosts of his own kind. Sometimes people would ask his name. He'd just say, John. The rest didn't matter anymore. Winter came slow to the desert. A cold that didn't bite just lingered. One night, he returned to the ridge. The wind still moved across it the same way, curling around the rocks, singing that low, lonely hymn the desert knew by heart. The cairn where Atsa lay had held, stones still piled, boughs still resting across the top. The feathers tied to it had faded to gray, but they still caught the moonlight like tiny ghosts. He knelt beside it, placing a single wildflower he'd carried in his coat, the last one he'd found on the trail. You were right, he said quietly. The earth does remember. He sat there a long time. When he finally stood, he looked east, the direction she'd always told him to go. And for the first time since the war, he smiled. It wasn't much, just a tired, crooked thing. But it was real. At dawn, a storm rolled over the horizon. The air shimmered with heat and dust, the kind of light that made everything look almost holy. John rode into it, hat low, coat flapping, the desert wind washing the last of his past from his skin. Behind him, the ridge glowed gold one final time, as if the sun itself was giving benediction to what it had witnessed. He didn't look back, not because he'd forgotten, but because he finally didn't have to. By nightfall, the trail opened into the wide valley beyond, a place where green finally returned, where the sound of water broke the silence. There, under the trembling light of a new moon, he found a small town. Lanterns flickered in windows. The faint sound of music drifted from a saloon. A fiddle, a woman's laugh, the heartbeat of life continuing despite everything. He stopped at the edge of town. The world smelled of rain. He looked down at his hands, scarred and weathered. The same hands that had killed, saved, and buried. The same hands Atsa had once held when she told him peace wasn't a place. He dismounted and whispered, "Guess I found the road after all." He walked toward the light. At dawn the next morning, townsfolk found his horse grazing by the river, reins dragging in the mud. They followed its trail to the church at the edge of town, small, whitewashed, its bell freshly hung. Inside, they found him sitting on the front pew, hat resting beside him, eyes closed. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, just a faint smile on his lips and the rising sun painting his face gold. On the altar lay an old feather, gray, delicate, placed gently beside a scrap of parchment. 3 words written in a soldier's hand: "The desert forgives."